Welcome to Silver Soul Gaming. I'm Seth. I'm here to talk about The Last of Us 2, one of the most polarising games I've ever seen released since Metal Gear Solid 2, and a lot of people are getting really fucking mad over some pixels on a screen. It's funny. I love the game personally. I thought it was quite heartwarming and, well, it wasn't heartwarming. I cried a lot and felt empty by the end of the game, and every time I played the game I was like, I don't even know if I can go to sleep now. I think I might cry. It's a depressing game, but it's a good game, I think. I'm just here to say, before I start, I planned on doing a non-spoiler review, but everyone's kind of got their review out, and a lot of people have already played it, and I thought, fuck it, let's just talk about spoilers. But the thing is, I only recorded early footage, and then I went, I want to talk about spoilers. But guess what? I don't have enough footage. Well, I do, but it's going to be a lot of the same footage, so I had to go back and record some confrontations, and that's about it. So I don't have a lot of footage. And you get to look at my face for the beginning of this video because I didn't want to waste that precious footage on the intro. But anyway, I'm just here to say whatever you want in the comments. Don't be all self-righteous about it. If you respect my opinion, my mouth is bad. If you respect my opinion, and I'll respect yours. It's as simple as that. Don't be a douche. It means I'm not... You can critique what I say. I don't give a fuck. Just because I say respect my opinion doesn't mean you can't criticize what I say. Fucking argue it with me in the comments. Just don't be a douchebag about it. This game, I felt, was great. And I really enjoyed playing it. With that out of the way, let's get right into the review. Alright. Like I said, this is going to be very spoiler heavy. Please, if you haven't played the game, play it, and I don't want your opinion if you haven't played the game or just read it or watched it. You have to play the game, and I'll talk about it with you if you have played the game. But look, I'm going to start out with the most controversial part of this game and just get it out of the way straight away. That's Joel's death, and it's one of the biggest reasons this game is so polarizing. Many argue his death was handled extremely poorly and the death scene was handled terribly, which I gotta disagree on. Whilst I think it was paced poorly and too early on in the game, the death itself was handled reasonably well for the world of The Last of Us, if I'm being honest. Joel was a protagonist, but he wasn't a good person for a lot of his life, and even during The Last of Us 1. You could argue by saving Ellie and taking away the chance for humanity to rebuild the cure ultimately showed he was a lot more concerned about himself than the others in the world, which he is. I love Joel. I think he's one of the best and most fleshed out video game characters to date. And it was very, very sad to watch him die in such a painful and demeaning way. But sadly, that's the depressing world of The Last of Us. No one gets a hero's death in that world. Many die a fate that isn't reflective of their character, and as such, Joel's death simply just reflects the world he lives in. I think seeing more of a development and what Ellie and Joel's relationship would have been like would have been nice to see. Even though we got those flashbacks, I still would have liked to see a little bit more of it. And maybe put those flashbacks at the beginning of the game so that it wasn't so, poorly paced, and fix some of those pacing issues in that game. But I think the abruptness and early death of Joel was done to create this feeling of emptiness and loss so early on in the game. And it worked on me, and I know it worked on many others. But it's done in that way to create a connection between Ellie and the player. You feel very similar to Ellie and the emotions she has. You feel that loss and emptiness without Joel in the game. I actually found myself saying, I miss Joel. I'm not shitting you, I was actually missing him in this game. This drives those feelings of revenge for you as the player, and obviously Ellie in the story. And you kind of have these very similar feelings, and it's done really well. I've seen many argue that Joel deserved some form of a hero's death, but he may have never deserved a hero's death. He took away Abby's dad, a good man who arguably could have saved the world, and along with his extremely dark and secretive backstory, makes him not really the hero of the game or the world, but rather a strong, complex character who has sadly destroyed the lives of many, but he also allowed a young girl to live, and allowed himself to be a dad again, whilst giving her a great life to live. And that shows Joel is not there to help others, but rather himself, and he just wanted to be a dad again. Without Sarah, he felt empty, and with Ellie there, he felt good again. And that's why Ellie lived, and he took away the chance for people to rebuild humanity and have a cure for the disease. Look, I know many feel betrayed by Naughty Dog, and understandably so. but no one gets to die the hero's death in the world of The Last of Us, especially Joel. And whilst we all love Joel, it would have just been so out of place and inconsistent with the game's world, tone, and theme to grant him the hero's death. I'm not looking to persuade you, and trust me, I was pretty unhappy and sad when he died. I found myself physically kind of shouting at the screen, I'm not gonna lie. But I don't feel betrayed or mad, I just think Naughty Dog did what was fitting for the world of The Last of Us. If there is something though that I've seen people unanimously agree on, it's just how far ahead in technicality this game is, and the immersion within the world it creates. The gameplay itself seems like something we'd be seeing from a PS5 or an Xbox Series X game. The game strives to make each enemy unique and different, trying to humanize them. Obviously they didn't do this greatly when they have the same 10 character models, but I think my favourite gameplay mechanic included in the game is when the last enemy can be disabled and they either beg or taunt the player to kill them or not to kill them, which is almost always followed up by me fucking just stabbing them in the throat as Ellie, or, you know, beating their head in as Abby. But it really just shows that this world is full of immersion, and Naughty Dog have tried their best to make the enemies actually human in this game. Combined with moments like dogs whimpering when you kill the owner, or the owner giving the dog a name and then charging at you in rage when you kill their dog, makes for an extremely powerful moment when you fucking kill these enemies. It's hard when you kill a dog. I really didn't want to kill any dogs in this game, but you're left with no choice because in that situation, Ellie would have had to kill the dog. That's just how it works. Each encounter with the enemies feels extremely cinematic and almost scripted as well. The enemy AI in this game is one of the best, if not the best enemy AI I think I've seen in any game. And the ability to lose an enemy and make them search and communicate with one another makes for an intense, immersive combat situation, which I loved every second of. New mechanics in this game were included, like jumping or going prone. This helped create a better immersion and allowed for the player to have the whole world at their use when taking down enemies. Going into cars and stealthily taking down an enemy with a quick arrow to the head, or using your crafting abilities to craft a silencer for your pistol, just further created these moments of immersion where you could feel in control, but you could also lose that control quite quickly and feel overwhelmed in a matter of seconds. Much like the first game, there is a heavy emphasis on stealth once again. However, Ellie uses her slim and small stature to sneak past enemies through small crevices and cracks, blend better in tall grassy environments, and hide under cars like I said. Something a much bigger and bulkier person like Joel physically just couldn't do in the first game. Naughty Dog also compensated for Ellie's physical abilities in hand-to-hand combat by giving her the switchblade from the first game, which allowed for the player to take on the bigger enemies in hand-to-hand combat. It also gave her the ability to take down the infected with ease and swiftness, unlike Abby, who, unlike Ellie, uses her bulkier physique to take down enemies rather than a switchblade. Abby is someone who I want to talk further about later in terms of story, but Abby, in terms of gameplay, plays and feels different to Ellie. She can't swiftly take down infected stealthily, or even be able to stand at great heights without getting dizzy and suffering from vertigo because she has a phobia of heights. Abby is much more stronger and bulkier compared to Ellie. She uses this far better in the physical confrontations and one-on-one fistfights, in which it feels like she has much more control than Ellie does during her playable sections. She, rather than slitting the throats of the enemies like Ellie does, she simply just strangles them or snaps their necks, like Joel did in the first game. The two playable characters do play completely different, and Abby seems to be more professionally trained in combat and more experienced, as we simply just see in her animations, the way she holds herself, and the weapons that she uses during the combat situations, whilst Ellie, who is less experienced, holds a great control over the stealth segments, but she can become easily overwhelmed in the combat sections. The world itself is enjoyable to play through and holds a lot of secrets in it, with notes that carry out through the whole level and tell a story of how people died, to not only the infected but the various factions like the WLF or the Seraphites. The large sprawling areas are fun to explore, and are similar to Uncharted 4's large areas with a lot of different paths and routes to take. They also have included a very large open world like area that we saw in Lost Legacy, which also plays very similar to the one in Lost Legacy as well, with a lot of optional areas to explore and a lot of optional upgrades for Ellie's equipment and her abilities as well. Naughty Dog really seem to be taking further steps away from linearity that we've seen in their past games. I really personally enjoy these areas, and I think they were a lot of fun to play in and explore, and it really just showcased the world that you were in. However, specifically this massive area was very early on, and it does get a little stale since you were only really sneaking around infected with only one real enemy encounter, during the optional areas, and exploring a large amount of open space with so little enemies to encounter can get kind of boring after a while. It's also the only area like this in the whole game, and it's so early on and just random that it further messes with the poor pacing in the game. Another point that sparked a lot of controversy in this game is allowing for the antagonist to be playable. Of course, this led to misleading marketing from Naughty Dog. Yes, there is no other way to put it, they did lie, and they swapped out character models, added voice lines from other characters, and they never spoke about Abby and her role in the game. And it's just misleading marketing. However, as much as I hated Abby at the beginning and the start of her playable segment, I actually kind of began to like her and her transformation from being a brutal killer with a closed-minded, poor, antagonistic views on the world, into someone who looks to help those around her and help those in need, because she feels guilt and remorse for killing Joel, and she needs to rectify that, which ultimately leads to a change in character and her sparing Ellie and Dina at the end of the game, and even further on at the very, very end, she doesn't even want to fight Ellie. With all that said though, I much preferred Ellie's part of the game. My main issue with Abby's segment was her friends. They are just not that likable outside of Lev and Yara, who are much more interesting and have a better relationship with Abby. And we have no idea what's actually going to happen to them, so we get invested in them, other than those who are a part of the WLF who we already know are going to die. It's just much harder to care for characters who we know are already dead, and we know how their stories end, which just makes it really fucking boring, especially if we don't care about Abby that early on, which is even worse in the very early flashbacks of Abby's playable segment, which is in contrast to Ellie's flashback scenes, where it's one of the very few moments we get to spend with Joel, and we see how their relationship deteriorated because of Joel's selfish choice in the first game and his lying, which leads to the two being disconnected by the start of this game. On the other hand, it is a lot of fun to explore and dive deeper into Ellie's character. It's especially fun to see what happened after the events of the first game, and we get those nice flashbacks to the museum, which is a beautiful, beautiful scene, and it's a great way to see how Joel and Ellie were caring for one another, and we really got to see that father and daughter relationship explored to great lengths during that scene. It's also a great way to break up the constant killing and violence in this game. Ellie's journey of revenge is beautiful to explore, and again, it's fun to dive deep into, and we see her transformation in contrast with Abby's transformation in this game. Ellie goes from being a survivor to a brutal killer who tortures people and kills specific characters that border on the line of survival and revenge. Jordan, for example, the one who Ellie scars at the beginning of the game, is killed by Ellie for both survival and revenge, whilst Nora on the other hand is intentionally tortured and killed for revenge, in information by Ellie, which leads to a very impactful moment which has repercussion on Ellie herself, scarring her mentally. This here is just a great example of where Naughty Dog's theme of revenge really starts to show how it deteriorates and corrupts one's mind, as we see in Ellie, which we begin to see again with the death of Mel, a pregnant woman, and Owen, who was only simply trying to defend himself and his unborn child. With the death of Mel, Ellie sees how her actions affect so many, just like Joel's did in the first game, which leads to showing her how revenge is simply just not the answer. Naughty Dog as well try to draw similarities between Abby and Ellie throughout the game's playtime. Abby lost her father and as such leads to seeking revenge and killing Joel, who in turn was Ellie's dad in a lot of ways, and leads to her seeking revenge. We see how both Ellie and Abby are looking to do good for their community as well, and are prominent members of it, respectively in the WLF and Jackson. Abby's journey is so similar to Joel's from the first game as well. Joel is someone who's closed-minded and is only in it to benefit himself and close friends like Tess at the beginning of the game, which is much like Abby at the beginning of her story in Part 2. However, both respectively meet Lev and Ellie and share extremely heartwarming moments with one another, and conquer obstacles together, which eventually leads to them developing a bond and bringing out the better parts of one another. Of course, this isn't the same story and relationship building with these two characters, but they're done in similar ways. Joel's story and relationship with Ellie are different from Abby's relationship with Lev, and at the end of the day, Joel is still selfish and chooses to save Ellie because he doesn't want to lose another daughter, and Abby still has her moments of hatred where we see her nearly kill Dina and Ellie, but Lev begs her to make the better choice. At the end of the day though, it shows that there is no good or bad, and morality is only kind of a point of view in this world, and it doesn't really exist. Characters are good and bad in their own way, and the choices that they make have consequences and result only further in death and harm for each person in this world. With that said though, the game does have its flaws, and I understand why some dislike the game. And I will say, Abby's part of the game is boring in a lot of ways, and I get why it's in the game's narrative for reasons. However, due to it kind of being a flashback and not chronological or interweaving with Ellie's story, it is just straight up boring. Using characters we know will die makes it boring, with only the interesting characters being the ones who we have no clue what will happen to them. If the game was paced and structured differently to be chronological, or maybe change Abby's story in certain ways so that it plays out in the beginning of the game and we play as her beforehand, and we get to experience maybe both sides of Ellie's story and Abby's story at the same time almost. Doing this, it'd make it a lot more interesting, I think. If we were to put Abby at the start, it'd probably make for a much more interesting game as well, since we don't actually know what will happen to her friends, and if it's kind of kept hidden of her secret revenge seeking, thing, Abby would probably be a better character. But at the end of the day, she's still a great character, I think. I do think some people are hating on the game for the wrong reasons and not criticizing it for actual issues, but rather choosing to focus on the creative narrative choices they just don't like. The biggest example I can think of other than Joel's death is the ending itself. It is again another point that sparks issue amongst fans and players because we don't kill Abby. But the game focuses not only on revenge, but forgiveness as well, and how it's important to forgive and end the cycle of violence that Joel created when he killed Abby's father. Abby is punished for what she did. She does get a fate that is pretty much worse than death. She loses all of her closest friends, who are essentially family to her. She loses her home, and is captured by a sadistic group of people who use her as a slave and leave her to die a horrible death. She is punished for seeking revenge, and so is Ellie as well for killing all the men, women, and even the dogs during her quest for revenge. Ellie loses her friends, her daughter, essentially her wife, and she even lost her switchblade and the ability to play the guitar, something that was so special to her and had such sentimental value because it was taught to her by Joel. However, the game teaches us that forgiveness is important with that final flashback of Ellie and Joel, with Ellie trying to forgive Joel for taking away the importance of what her life could have been and having a meaningful death. Joel most likely never wanted Ellie to obviously become like him and have this quest for revenge, but it also shows that forgiveness may be the answer, not revenge. Which, yes, the game gets incredibly lost in its theme, I do think, but it's an important overarching theme and is reflected in the characters, the world, and for a world that lacks a lot of forgiveness, it's really trying to teach Ellie to find that forgiveness, because the world has none, and as such it just leads to a cycle of killing. Many have argued that they should have had the choice to kill Abby, but that's not what this game is about. The game is specifically about the characters and that what they would do. Removing all choice from the player eliminates all inconsistencies in that world and characters and makes for a much better story and more solid narrative. It's quite fitting for a much more linear game as well, that has not a lot of open world, unlike other games. And it seems recently that a lot of other games as well seem to follow a trend of putting more and more choice on the player, which can create inconsistencies in the world and the character, and create a really poorly written story and really shitty characters I don't care about because they lack a character arc and development. With that being said, choice can be done well if it's fitting to the character and the world, like The Witcher 3, where everything you do can be argued that Geralt would do in that situation. So if they were to be given a choice to kill Abby, it completely removes that forgiveness aspect and theme that they tried to implement so much into this game, and it only makes Ellie seem more like the villain in this story rather than the protagonist. As well as this, Ellie would learn no lesson from her actions and essentially make her and Abby almost the same character in a lot of aspects. The final action of not killing Abby and being left with nothing except the memory of Joel is so powerful. Not tainting the memory of Joel with more death left me feeling empty and depressed. In a good way though. It's hard to explain unless you kind of played the game and got to that ending and felt the same about the story and the world and its characters. It's a powerful game. It does make some poor decisions, it makes some great ones that make for an amazing story, but it does have some really, really fucking dumb storytelling choices. But I love this game, flaws and all. At the end of the day though, it is just a game like I said at the start of this video. It's a bunch of pixels and polygons on the screen, and it's how I interpreted it and felt about it specifically. If you don't like it or you disagree with me, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I'm always open to discussion on the game that isn't a fucking argument. And players, if you didn't play the game, and you simply just watched it or read the plot points, please shut the fuck up. You can't be a part of the discussion about the game's story, symbolism and themes, because you just don't fucking understand it. And I've seen this again and again. You need to play the game, and if you didn't like it, that's fine, but play the fucking game. if you have an opinion on it. You have to play the game and finish it. I've been Seth from Silver Soul Gaming. Thank you guys for watching. If you stuck to this part, you're a legend. And if you got to this part, make sure you give the video a like, subscribe. What did you think of The Last of Us 2? If you didn't like it, tell me why. I feel like people have some pretty good opinions and some people have some shit ones. Anyway, I will see you guys later next week for another video.